Bum bum bum, literature gets a look. Legs talk about books. Hello and welcome back to Legs Talk About Books, the monthly literature podcast where we talk about books. I'm your host, Hardleg Joe. Joining me today, once again, the glorious Joseph Rothschild, aka MBT.
Hey, I'm glad to be back. I love doing these Halloween episodes, reading some spooky books, and listening to Hardleg catch the black lung in the other end of the call.
No, I'm gonna cut out all the coughing. They're not gonna hear that. That's the least spookiest thing we need in here right now.
Oh my god, Hardleg, you're coughing again. Oh my god, you're retching blood.
It's all over.
The listeners can't hear. It's terrible.
If we do this for like 5 years straight, we have to one day start doing it and make it like an audio drama where like spooky stuff starts happening as we're talking about things. No, we just gotta be like, yeah, we discovered this new author that we've never heard of, Eladiah Jacob, and ever since we've read him, I've been having nightmares.
Why, I do believe my flesh has been transmuted. I know it sounds insane.
And then we just start talking about these stories that don't exist, and then halfway through we start babbling in ancient Sumerian and shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I intended to do that here.
But yeah, if you're joining us, if you're unaware, if you're not watching this the day it comes out, this is our October episode. Last year, we read a selection of short stories by H.P. Lovecraft for October, and we thought we'd keep up the short story theme, this time switching to another famous horror author, Stephen King. And specifically, we read his collection called Night Shift, which is, 13 short stories?
I believe it's 20 short stories,
oh, okay.
So we may be here for a while. Don't worry, there will be some we're going to probably spend 10-15 minutes on, and then there's some that we'll maybe spend a sentence on.
Yeah.
That might be a little generous.
We'll see. It's very interesting. He's got a much more different style than Lovecraft, I'll say. It's almost
Certainly.
like they were therapeutic for him. Like, you could tell he was scared of the shit he was writing about, or that it, like, seriously bothered him. Where King is more, like, experimental. Like, I don't get the feeling he's scared of trucks. I think he was just like, hey, you know what would be a really interesting idea for a story? Like, a lot of these are just exploring his imagination, you know?
The cocaine helped, I'm sure, as well.
Cocaine helped for... Lawnmower Man had to have been cocaine.
Yeah, I've never read a story where I've been more convinced that someone was actually doing drugs while writing and publishing it. Like, everyone involved.
Every step of the way. And
we'll get to Lawnmower
we'll get to
Man.
this, but we'll get to that eventually. But yeah, like I said, it because of that, there's, you know, with Lovecraft, I feel like there was a general tone throughout all of his work. Like, you read a collection of Lovecraft stories, and some are all right, and some are better than others, but they all sort of have that same meatiness to them. With King, it's like, his highs are probably better than Lovecraft, but his lows are, like, completely random nonsense from, like, what the fuck is this?
I actually had this exact same conversation with my wife on the drive over here. We were talking, and I was like, yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of King, and... his highs, like It, The Stand, they're just out of this world, like fundamentally foundational works of just absolutely clenching horror. And then, like, he wrote Cell and sold Cell to consumers, and they read it, like, really could be locked up for that.
Well, because you were a fan of, would it be safe to call you a Stephen King fan? Because I know you've read quite a bit of him.
It is a very weird, so I came into the Lovecraft episode with no understanding of Lovecraft whatsoever, a very regrettable blind spot in sort of my literary education, but horror just isn't taken seriously by any academic, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
And it's because it's such an insular group of authors. There's very few. The foundational works, the Draculas, the Frankensteins, you know, they, of course... are canonized, you know, everyone knows them, but, you know, modern horror, who would you even name outside of King, right? It's like asking who John Grisham's contemporaries are, right? Like, who does Dean Koontz write for? I can't even pronounce the guy's name.
There's a couple other, I know if you named them. I forget, who's the guy who did Hellraiser?
Oh, I have no idea.
There's that. If I said his name, I would know it. I'm gonna look at it. Go ahead and continue your thought, and I'll say it out.
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I had two sort of reading odysseys. One was Vonnegut, because his work Breakfast of Champions references like 15 of his other works,
Yeah.
all of which involved Kilgore Trout. And Stephen King's Dark Tower series references 22, at the time, I think it's more now, of the books he has written. So I was like, I'll read the 22 books, then I'll read Dark Tower. And I exhausted my library's collection of Stephen King. They were missing a couple of them, and I never started Dark Tower. It's a huge... I'll go back someday, but not anytime soon. I ended up reading probably about 15 or 16 Stephen King works. So I do like him very much. I really do... think he writes in just such a fantastic... he writes in a way that it is very easy to devour his work. I mean, he's like a very sit-down, read the entire book kind of author. It is not challenging, but it is still quite meaningful. And
I'll never forget the first Stephen King book I ever read, and I haven't read a lot, but in high school I read The Shining, because I was very big on reading stuff that I had heard about. And I remember the one thing that always stuck with me is there's a moment where the boy in The Shining is like walking down a hallway and he sees a fire extinguisher like just embedded into the wall. Like, just a normal fire extinguisher. And he looks at it and he starts to imagine like, creepy stuff happens in this hotel. What if it uncoils like a snake? What if it explodes? What if it does all this? And he like moves to the other side of the hallway and he slowly creeps around this fire extinguisher. And then he gets to the other side and just keeps going. And it's literally nothing happens, but Stephen King made walking down the hallway opposite of a fire extinguisher the most tense situation I had ever read. Like, holy shit.
I'm glad you mentioned Shining also, because I think that's emblematic of a lot of Stephen King stuff. If you, dear listener, have only ever watched Stephen King work, you haven't read any of it, I would really urge you to do so. There is not a single faithful adaptation of, I think, anything he's ever written.
No.
Pretty much any adaptation of any of his work, including the adaptations written or directed by King himself, are wildly different than their source material. It's just a completely different experience.
Very much so. And it's sweet. What was it? The only other story I've read by him, other than the short stories, obviously, was It. And I really liked It, but I'll contend that like it has horror elements. I don't really think It is like a horror story.
It's a coming-of-age story.
Yeah, it's more... I thought of it more of like an action-adventure. Like, yeah, there's coming-of-age elements. But it's really like, Pennywise is not always super scary. He's more like a monster, and he's scary because he can kill you and he does scary shit. But the point of the book is not to, like, just build tension around Pennywise like the movies are. Like, there's a lot more, like, investigating his origins and the characters coming to terms with it and figuring out how to deal with it, both as adults and children.
It is also interesting because it's got the same type of Lovecraft-inspired writing that I think I would call, like, Stephen King's lasting horror impression. Like, if you've ever read Desperation, that's my favorite of his. It's really, really good about this. But you see it in a lot of these individual short stories, and we'll talk about them over the course of the episode. Lovecraft kind of, if you listen to the previous episode, he was sort of obsessed with the concept of like a perversion of shape, a perversion of like substance, like just an indescribable profanity regarding like what you could see or sense. And King is about like the profane in the context of religion, like pagan iconography, like a twisted Christ. And in a lot of ways, he is a very American horror author. He taps into these sort of primal Protestant fears about like a false god that, in my opinion, have developed out of this weird American Christianity in which all sects believe that all others are praying to a fundamentally uncanny or profane image of the Christ, and then translates that unease into literal, like, antichrist figures that exist and are prayed to and are imbued with awesome power. And I just the way he describes like the uncanny Christ or the profane Christ is it's just mesmerizing. And the 3 or 4 in which he does it in Night Shift are the high points of the entire book for me. And we'll get to them as we go through it.
Now, see, because I had written down beforehand, I wanted to kind of talk about how he tackled religion, but I felt almost like the opposite of that. Maybe it's just because I basically lost most of my religious feelings a long time ago, but I almost feel like this idea where he'll talk about, there's a ghost or whatever, and saying a Bible passage seems to shy it away, or like throwing a Bible at something makes it stop. Like, it just seems ridiculous to me. Like, it's just, like,
right?
Completely absurd.
What I do like is that it works so infrequently. Like in Lovecraft's work, where, like, humans would try and beat back, like, a deep old ancient one by, like, stumbling across a couple of pieces of the Necronomicon or something, and, like, trying to do an incantation, screwing it all the way up, and just incurring disaster. So in so many of these stories are people like, oh, okay, so here's how we repel the demon, and it turns out, the language of the biblical is something that we are not prepared to comprehend.
Yeah.
I do think that from the perspective of American Christianity, it is kind of weird to hear, like, oh, the Holy Communion will repel these demons, because, like, every Catholic does that every week. But yeah, in the greater context of King, it seems like his Necronomicon is, like, biblical language, full stop.
Yeah. And that's, I don't know, I'm not sure if that's necessarily a King thing, because, again, I haven't read a whole lot of horror, but I know a lot about horror movies, and I feel like that's less of a Stephen King thing and more of, like, a 70s horror, where you're looking at stuff like The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby, where you have, like, a country that's ostensibly Christian, and then, like you said, around that time, you start having more interconnectedness, and all these different sects are interacting, and sort of realizing, like, well, wait, my Baptist minister says this, and the Protestant guy says this, and they're fundamentally different, but we both believe in the same thing, I think, or we're supposed to, and it's sort of this distrust, while still also believing that, like, but demons are out there.
Yeah.
And you can fight them with crosses and holy water and such.
So 2 things. One, I think that small difference between sects of Christianity is exactly the type of fear that King is trying to tap into with, like, incantations of a profane Christ. Because, like, though they don't say it out loud, a lot of Christian believers believe all other forms of Christianity are praying to a false god, right? And this is just bringing it out in the open, like, yeah, this is literally a false god. Or, like, the god of Christianity is false, the god of the corn is correct. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But also, I honestly think it might be something as simple as Christianity was in vogue when foundational works of horror were being written, so King had to write that the cross repels vampires.
Yeah, well, the thing that struck me, though, was that, whereas you're kind of drawing lines between that and, like, Lovecraft's use of the Necronomicon, I actually think it's kind of different, because I read some early Lovecraft, and I've read some, like, his contemporaries when he was starting out, and that age, like, right after Edgar Allan Poe, the sort of late Victorian era, a lot of the stuff that they're afraid of are, like, witches. There's a lot of talk of witchcraft in these stories, and those had the same hollowness that the Christianity stuff had in this, where it's like, looking at it now, it doesn't really make sense. Or not doesn't make sense, but it doesn't hold the same sort of weight to it. And I think what made Lovecraft sort of stand out was he said, no, none of the stuff that you know normally, none of that works. Because if it did work, there would be magic all over the place, man. Like, if you could pick up a book at the library about demonology and summon demons, they would be fucking everywhere. So he specifically came up with this lore about, like, there's a book bound in flesh, written in blood from the ancient times, and, like, 4 of them exist in the world, and that's the only one that's true.
And in King, they literally do fucking exist everywhere. You walk down the street and there's a kid practicing voodoo. Like, he went to the library.
I mean, there is a story, we'll get to it. There's one where it's like, he's like a teacher, and he just goes to the library and gets a book on demonology. and
it works. He summons a demon. He's like, this was easy.
I'm surprised more people don't solve their problems this way. It's oddly simple.
Do they have a section on foundation repair? I could go learn that next, too.
I mean, this is a very small boon to ask for a demon. Like, just my foundation's a little cracked. How much blood do I gotta get? I can kill a rat. I don't mind. I'll get you like 10 rats. I'll go down to the store.
There's probably some, embedded in the foundation.
Yeah, probably. There's maybe some rats in the walls.
Oh, speaking of, I guess we should do the stories, huh?
Yeah, probably. So yeah, if you're new to the podcast, usually we spend the first half sort of like giving our spoiler-free thoughts. And then we're just going to dive into the stories themselves. This is going to be slightly different since we're reading a bunch of short stories. We're just going to go one after another. So if you haven't read these yet and you'd like to, I'd recommend it. They're an entertaining read. I don't feel like I wasted my time for the most part.
I think the longest one of these is like 40 pages. And we'll tell you which ones are good. So you can probably go home and read 5 of these. It'll take you an hour.
Yeah. I mean, I guess right now, if you were to pick a top 3 to tell people to read and then come back, what would you pick?
My opinion will change by the end of the episode, so this will be a good point for you to cut back and forth. But Jerusalem's Lot, The Boogeyman, and Children of the Corn.
Okay. I'm glad we agree on The Boogeyman. I really like that one.
Boogeyman's so good. We'll get to it, but it's so good.
I'm actually going to go, I think Graveyard Shift is pretty good. I liked that one. I would say read Lawnmower Man. It's not good, but read it. Read it because it's like so bad it's good, I guess.
You do have to read Lawnmower Man. That is not negotiable.
Read Last Rung on the Ladder. But I'll warn you, it's not a horror. It's not a traditional horror story. It's not like the other ones. But I contend that it's very, very good, and I plan to talk on it a bit later.
Oh, good. I have very little to say about that one.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead. I figure we'll just tackle them in the order that they went in. I assume both our copies of the book went in the same. They started with Jerusalem's Lot, right?
Yep, that's the one.
Okay. And you seem to have a lot more to say about this, so I'm going to give you the floor.
Oh, I loved Jerusalem's Lot. One of my favorites for sure. I thought it was a standout. Might have been just because I read it first. So a little bit of background about Salem's Lot in general. One of Stephen King's really first breakout books was Salem's Lot. It's about a bunch of vampires that live in Jerusalem's Lot. This is not a story about vampires. There is a story later that includes Salem's Lot, and there are vampires. It is very frustrating that he did not think of 3 places that could all have vampires independently. Well, I loved this one for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because I thought it was going to be about vampires, and not just because I'd read Salem's Lot, also because it starts out exactly like Dracula. There's like a very blood quantum type person, an individual from a long lineage of nobility or whatever, moving into a spooky old castle and communicating through letters written to a friend, which is just straight up, it's literally just Dracula. That's just the start of Dracula. And it turns out that, in fact, it is not a story about vampires, and the point at which it becomes clear is when we start talking about blood quantum. As soon as it becomes clear that this is an individual, not from a long line of nobility, but from a long line of genetically mad individuals, the or switch just, flips.
Like, corrupted. The one thing, I wrote down one sentence for Jerusalem's Lot, and it was, Stephen King does Lovecraft, but without the racism.
We'll see.
Because it's got that same, it's got the same idea of family being corrupted and you're inheriting it. There's voices in the walls. There's an evil deity that's not really it's not vampires. I don't know what you would call it.
Yeah. No. As soon as you kind of hear the weight of centuries, weight of eons type of inherited madness, you're like, oh, it has to be Lovecraft. This is 100% going to be a Lovecraft story. It's also 80% of the fact pattern is just lifted from Shadow over Innsmouth. This incestuous nation, group of individuals all bred from the same stock. In this case, a single individual. And we've also got the Celtic Druidian Bible, the pagan kind of perverted Christ that ends up showing up a lot too.
Yeah. He twists it, but I kind of like this one a little bit more because it's not just the devil or demon. He kind of invents his own mythology. What do they call it? Like the Court of Worms or something?
Yeah, so I think it just straight up is like Yogg-Sothoth or something.
Yeah, I think they might say Yogg-Sothoth somewhere in there, and I forgot to mark it down.
Yeah, oh no, it's a servant of Yogg-Sothoth.
Okay,
it's,
gotcha.
The worm from beyond space, and the the work that they find, the profane instrument, the Necronomicon stand-in MacGuffin is called like the Book of the Worm or something like that.
Yeah, it had a more epic name, and I can't think of it now.
I guess I can just find it. But like in pretty much all of the Lovecraft we read, a taint upon the natural world, like a darkness in a position, just spreads outward. I'm thinking of Color Out of Space here specifically, and infects the surrounding area. Yeah. And it has clearly infected Chapelwaite, I think is where they're living, and reanimated corpses in the basement, and caused suicide, I think it's implied.
Driven people mad. No one goes into Salem's Lot. You've got the New England setting with the townspeople who are very superstitious and cowardly.
New England works so well because it is a distinctly cursed land, like in what was the one?
The Dunwich Horror. I think they mentioned
like in the Dunwich
at
Horror
some point.
They did, yes. Like in the Dunwich Horror, where it's a collection of latent evil energy from just New England proper. This is a deep earthed spirit, a worm that lives inside the ground of cursed, blasted New England. It's just, it's great.
I will say, this isn't like one of my favorite stories, but I will say it's really well done. It has a lot of different kinds of fear that it tackles. It's got everything from like almost the body horror of the resurrected corpses in the walls, and then also like a monster in the giant snake demon, and then also the am I going mad, the existential horror, and of course like the profane church, the sort of like nature has been corrupted horror. Yeah,
absolutely. And it does have it does read a little bit like fan fiction, but it's written but in essence all horror is just functionally fan fiction, so I'm not too beat up about it.
It's pretty compelling too. I like also the the characters are pretty understated, but I still like the butler and the guy. They had a good relationship. You had very dedicated. You can't hate a dedicated butler.
No, yeah, that guy rocked.
Yeah, it's like that guy doesn't deserve a butler that good.
I'm looking for a Cal. If you're a potential Cal for me, drop your resume in the comments. I promise to go mad and kill us both.
Yeah, and then they have that was it, the very ending, where suddenly it's all these letters from like what, the 1800s, early 1900s or something. And then he's like, my only hope is that with my death, the bloodline dies out. And then the next letter's from like 1974, and it's like, oh, well, his brother had a bastard son, and I am his descendant, and I've inherited his house, and I found this old journal. Isn't it creepy? Also, there's a bunch of bumps in the walls and shit. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, this is kind of hacky, and King does this, I think, in every single goddamn story in this. Is like, the very end is like, but who was phone? This, okay, yeah, we get it. There's
like,
a sting.
I'd say he's M. Night Shyamalan, but obviously this was like 40 years before that.
Yeah.
So then, moving on to Graveyard Shift, also known as The One with the Rats.
So, I have very little to say about this one, but apparently it left an impression on you. So what did you feel about Graveyard Shift?
The thing that struck me about it, because I actually read this one on stream for people to listen to, and I'm very happy because I wasn't the only person that after it was done, people were like, man, there's some really classist undertones going on through this thing.
Thank God you went. I literally wrote Marxist. The very first thing I was like, yeah, we're doing Marxist.
And it's like, that doesn't make the story good, but it does make it really compelling.
Yeah.
Again, this is not like, when I look at a story, it doesn't need to have undertones or like a metaphorical meaning, and a lot of King stuff doesn't, and it's still entertaining. But I like it when something can be really entertaining and have some cool visuals and also maybe have some subtext to it. And there's definitely something going on here where you have, like, the workers in this decrepit building, and they're like, we're going into the sub-basement that hasn't been cleaned in years, and it's full of vermin. And, of course, it's the poorest workers on the 4th of July who have to go down getting paid just a pittance extra. I don't know. I really liked it. I found it was really interesting. I like the ending of it, like the imagery of like the rats the size of puppies and like the albino ones that don't have like any legs that just slither around.
Absolutely. I do want to echo a lot of the stuff you're saying. I don't think the class angle is particularly subtle. I think there's a point where the foreman... Is it the foreman? He just straight up looks at them and says, "This has never been a unionized workforce. Like, we ain't unionized and we never will be." And then they're literally killed by a group of rats acting in solidarity. Yeah. This, like, weird collective attack where the rats with whip tails and wings choke them and pull them apart.
And meanwhile, the one thing I'm curious about is, like, is the boss supposed to represent the upper class? Or is it, like, the boss is still a working class guy like they are, but it's supposed to show that how it pits them against his workers?
Yeah, I think so. And I do like that the rats aren't just, like, they're not viewed as, like, oh my god, under here there's big evil rats. They're just kind of a force of nature, right? They're just breeding down there and living, and they're overwhelmed by the rats like you would be overwhelmed by, like, a wave or, like, the passage of time or the endless arc of history towards the glorious revolution. You know, like, the Marxist reading writes itself.
Yeah. And it's just weird because none of his other work really has anything to do with that. Not that I could see, really.
Oh, I mega disagree, but, you know, I'll get real mad about stuff later, I suppose. This is also kind of the first example in this compilation of, I guess, sort of industrial horror. There's a discussion at the beginning.
There's something really visceral about, like you said, the way the rats aren't scary when they appear. If anything, it's like the people the workers are trying not to be bothered by the rats. They're like, oh, they're just vermin, and the rats like make themselves more fearful or more frightening, if that makes any sense. Like, there's not a lot of tension written into the rats, but you as an audience member realize they should be afraid.
Yeah. No, and I think there's a quote in the beginning about, like, in the foreword, about fear as, like, an irrational response to rational events. And what strikes me about this story is that the circumstances just are believable. Like, at its core, the conflict is caused not by rats, because, like, the rats are going to exist no matter what. They're caused by a workman who just, like, does not give a fuck about safety standards. Yeah. And, like, that kills a billion people.
And you know what's funny is we have been asked by one of the patrons to talk about all the adaptations that have been made of these. Have you seen the adaptation of Night Shift? Because this was made into a movie.
Wait, there's an adaptation of Graveyard Shift?
Yeah, there's an adaptation of Graveyard Shift. I have not seen it, but I watched like a little review of it, and it's like, the first half of it seems like it's got everything there, except for there's a woman who works at the plant now to be a love interest. And then at the end, instead of having this, like, grave showdown where the guy, like, sacrifices himself to get revenge on the boss, there's a big battle against a giant rat using a forklift.
Oh, dude, that rocks. That's so cool. Man, fuck Stephen King. That shit rocks.
It's like...
And the forklift was alive!
I don't know if it's, like, cool because it's, like, they're taking this obviously campy premise and making it more campy, or if it's, like, you had a chance to have a dark, meaningful ending, and instead you went with the action hero cliche of, like, the guy riding in to fight the monster with the girl around in his arm. Like,
is there, like, a scene where they show up with, like, an AK-47, and it's a rat the size of a house, and they go, damn.
We're gonna need a bigger gun.
We're gonna need some stronger rat poison. And then a guy comes up with a forklift and he goes, need a lift? And then they stab it into the rat's heart. Yo, let's rewrite Graveyard Shift right now.
I don't think I have the stress to do that.
No, I don't have the interest.
It's already midnight. This is a late episode.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's spooky.
That would be my recommend. That's why I recommended it though. Graveyard Shift, not necessarily anything in depth, but it's a good, entertaining story from my end.
For sure. Night Surf.
Oh, you have the list now. I thought I was in control of the list. I see how it is.
Haha.
Yeah, but Night Shift hits a lot harder after the pandemic.
Yeah, so for those of you who are unfamiliar with King, my favorite work of his is The Stand.
I have heard this is a prequel to that.
It is, I think, the source material. Like, I think he wrote this, then he was like, oh, let's write about The Stand. The Stand's about an influenza variant, I think, called Captain Trips. It has a 100% communicability rate and a 100% death rate. It is a fantastic story. The portion of the book where everyone dies except those who are naturally immune lasts about 100 pages, and it's a 900-page book. It's really,
and then a
really
lot of
cool.
it's like kind of post-apocalyptic-y.
Yeah, yes, it is. And the one thing I like the most about The Stand is they absolutely isolate the best. It's the best writing about like an apocalyptic pandemic I've ever seen, because they go, there was a pandemic that wiped out 99.99% of the earth. And then there was a second extinction event immediately afterwards, where millions of people who were naturally immune but cannot care for themselves died. Children whose parents were killed. Elderly whose caregivers were killed. Anyone who was dependent on anyone else.
Anyone who didn't know how to farm in general.
Yeah. That always struck me as like, that's so crazy that even in like the face of the apocalypse, the biggest existential threat to humanity, save for an extinction event like that, is like a lack of community. That's just so frightening.
Inability
it's
to
a
work
very
together.
good piece of work.
Yeah.
But this is I guess I would call it a companion piece to The Stand. It's about a group of naturally immune individuals who are chilling in the post-apocalypse.
Yeah. And it's a thing. It doesn't really go anywhere or have like a point to it.
It's really hard in COVID though. There are a lot of parallels that, of course, if there was a pandemic, it would have to follow these like specific things. But calling it like a novel influenza that originated out of East Asia, it's like, oh.
But they talk specifically. He's like, they're like, yeah, on the news they said it wouldn't be any worse than the flu. Showed that.
Yeah, and here we are.
Like I said, the only thing that it kind of lacks for it is just the fact that like they're just chilling, and then like one of them has a discussion where he's like, "Yep, I thought I was immune, but I got it."
Yeah. The twist of it is that coming in contact with the strain does not guarantee you immunity to every strain of it, so you can still catch it.
Yeah.
Even if you have been exposed to one of the strains and survived, or were naturally immune to it. Which is, again, quite literally any flu and potentially COVID as well. We'll see in the next coming months. But what I like about this and what I like about The Stand is that Stephen King is so just amazingly good at writing, oh, the world is over type minutia. Like, there's a description of a warm beer in this one that I'm just like, damn, I do like warm beer. Damn. And I guess you wouldn't be able to get cold beer if the world ended. Shit, you're right.
Yeah, it's got this. It has a good tone. It's enjoyable, and it's super short. It's got to be one of the shortest ones in here.
And it's one of those. It's also one of those stories where King writes about sex. We'll get into King and sex, I think, a little bit later, but it's completely psychosexual. It's just like people are having sex because it's something to do in this story, and it's like, yeah, it's the end of the world. What do you expect?
Yeah, what else are you gonna do? Try to build stuff?
Hell no.
Especially because it's a bunch of teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
But let's see. Moving on to I Am the Doorway.
Yeah, so I didn't like this one. I think that as I was just saying, I think King's at his best when he's describing minutia, like the specifics of like late night July 4th grimy work or like warm beer, things that he's familiar with. He's really good, but he clearly does not know what an astronaut is or does, and the writing super suffers because of it.
I don't know. somewhat. I feel like it's got this campy 70s astronaut kind of vibe to it. Like, I can kind of suspend my disbelief that that's not how astronauts work, because most people didn't really know how astronauts worked.
Yeah, we probably landed on the moon like 30 seconds before he wrote this.
Yeah. Because they're talking about the whole premise is a guy, he's an astronaut, they go to orbit Venus as sort of like a last-ditch effort to prove that, like, the space station, or the space program has usefulness.
Yeah, they found nothing on the moon or Mars.
Yeah. Which, it's weird to think, but I do remember my dad talking about, like, yeah, after we landed on the moon, people were like, yeah, next is Mars, we'll get there in, like, 10 years. 5
and
years.
Here we are.
And yeah, no, not quite. But yeah, he goes to Venus, they orbit it, it's very sinister. There's a malfunction with the rocket on the way back. The other guy who's on the rocket with him dies. He survives, but he gets like a spinal injury, so he's wheelchair bound for the rest of his life. And he's just living in Florida, just retired. He's got a big retirement package. And then, how many years after that is it? Like 3, 4?
Yeah, it's not very many.
Yeah, but it is like a couple years. It's not like immediately after he gets back. Like, they quarantine him and do all this stuff, and then it's like, yeah, he's just living his life. And then suddenly he starts to get these, like, little golden eyes growing on his hands that he could see out of. And when he sees through the eyes in his hands, he's sort of, like, seeing himself from this alien perspective that sees humans as these monstrous, indescribably horrific things. And he has this desire to, like, both scream at himself in fear and also to crush his own face because it's so monstrous, and like he sees himself as an affront to, like, God because he's seeing him from alien perspective. And personally, I thought that was, like, a really cool sci-fi, like, element to it. I really love sci-fi stories that have, like, completely inhuman aliens, where it's not just people, it's like this weird virus that, like, reproduces by living in your skin and then, like, becoming you.
I can get that.
So, I know that one didn't really work for you, but I'd find this one of the more entertaining ones. It has even less than, like, Graveyard Shift as far as, like, there's not really any themes or anything. I just really like this horror element. I've never seen something like that, this idea of, like, a thing growing inside of you that also, like, is disgusted by you. And of course then it grows to it hates the people that, like, walk by his house, and he ends up, like, attacking and killing people because he can't control his hands.
Yeah, and they have some sort of mastery over the weather or something, which I guess makes sense because Venus is a weather planet.
I guess. I don't know. He shoots lightning at a guy.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then he goes home and he burns off his hands.
And then 4 years pass, and in classic, like, the Lovecraftian thing, it's like, oh, they're planning another mission to Venus, and I keep writing all these letters to tell them, to love of God, don't go to Venus.
Also, this is great because, like, if you were an ex-astronaut, like one of the 3 people who went to Venus, the one who survived, why wouldn't you just walk up and be like, yo, I went to Venus and this crazy shit happened to me? Yeah. He's like, they would think I was crazy. Dog, you're the only one who went to Venus. I think they would be willing to listen to you.
Well, plus, especially, like, he hides his hands and he doesn't want to show them because his hands, like, attack people. But it's one of those things, like, man, if you went to a hospital, like, yeah, maybe you would kill some more people, but I can't imagine that guy, like, getting out of a populated... I don't know. You think the military would, like, kill him or whatever and just be like, man, he had weird Venus powers.
He talks about it. He's like, oh, they'd like dissect me. And it's like, yeah, that's good. He's like, and that would be good. And I'm like, then go do it. It was weird. It's a story that exists to, I think, as you said, provide this really cool perspective on, like, how other alternate evolutionary paths would view ours as monstrous. Like, we view monsters as monstrous. But the surrounding elements, like the description of being an astronaut, the motivations of the character, the weird, like, jump scare at the end, they're kind of weak.
Yeah. It's not the best story. I feel like it's a good setup for, like, a better... You could take the concept and work with it better. But
I think that he did. From a Buick 8 has a lot of the same stuff as this.
Does it? I thought From a Buick 8 was just about a weird truck.
No, that's trucks. From a Buick 8 has a lot of outside peering in, inside peering out type stuff in it.
Well, I was going to say, the other thing is not even necessarily that, like, different divergent evolutionary paths, but I like this idea of, there's a trope in Star Trek where they will land on, like, a primitive alien planet, and, like, someone will pick up a phaser and they'll think it's magic, or they won't understand it, or they'll find something radioactive and just bring it home, not knowing that it's, like, poisoning everyone. And I like that element played with, like, modern day, where it's like, this guy went to Venus, he came back, and stuff starts happening to him, and it's because the biology involved with these creatures is so different from anything that we've done, that he's not sure, like, am I, like, impregnated by these things? Are these things, like, have they, like, what the hell is going on? There's just no understanding of it. And I'm like, I really like stuff that I'd like to see a story that explores that a little bit more in depth. This idea of being completely out of your element with science, like, everything you know about science doesn't explain this. But, yeah, moving on. The Mangler!
I am very scared to know your opinion on the Mangler, because I fucking love the Mangler. The Mangler I love this one. It's like maybe my fourth favorite. Really? I think the Mangler rocks.
Interesting. I think it has the most visceral gore.
The gore in this one is so...
this is the only story that, like, I cringed a little bit. I was like,
Because it kills in such a specific... So, yeah, we'll give you the breakdown. The Mangler is the worst possible thing you could have titled this. It's about...
a killer washing machine.
Yes, it's about a killer steam press that steams and folds your clothes.
Yeah,
That's
like a big industrial one. We should be, like... This is not, like, a tiny washing machine. This thing is, like, 20 feet tall, like, 40 feet long.
So, big surprise, when it kills people, it will press and fold their bodies, and it is very descriptive.
Where, like, it gets your arm first, and then it, like, crushes your shoulder, and your neck snaps off, and, like, oh my God.
There's a moment where they save a guy who is being eaten by it by cutting off his arm, and they're saying the blood that's being pressed into his arm makes him look like he is going to pop at the socket. And I was like, oh no, that's enough.
Yeah, because it's flattening his hand, and the blood's just pushing up into his forearm, and it's like, oh my disgusting. God.
Okay, so first about the Mangler. It is literally just an SCP. Like, there are a lot of... when I think of horror written in the 21st century, I think of dumb shit like The Holder of the End and, like, SCPs. And so many of these short stories could be lifted whole cloth and put into the wiki, and it would be indistinguishable from, like, an SCP.
Yeah,
so it's
get
clear,
on it,
like,
writers. We need Mangler in the SCP thing. That and the killer
fridge. But we kind
fridge.
of already have it. like we sort of already have the Mangler. Like, it's sort of the factory. It does, and you can see that, like, a lot of people writing horror now were influenced by these type of stories specifically. Like, again, like, you can see the straight line from Lovecraft to King. You can see the straight line from King to, like, modern horror writers, if you want to call people who edit a wiki horror writers, but, I probably would.
Oh yeah, speaking of, real quick, just complete side note, if we're doing this, like, next year, and we're looking at, like, more modern horror authors, Harlan and Ellis and Clive Barker.
Oh, I love Harlan.
Yeah, those are the two where I'm like, oh yeah, those guys. If I say their names, I'm like, oh yeah, I know them. They made a million short stories. But I couldn't think of them at the time.
Well, The Mangler is, it's another industrial horror story. But this time the fear isn't as a result of, like, the surrounding variables. It's a result of, like, the machination of the thing. And, like, the fear just comes from these sort of old world industrial revolution clockwork innards that are so prone to just straight up murdering people. Yeah, I don't know if this is like a law school thing, but I feel like every case I'm reading in law is like, someone was mangled to death by a piece of industrial revolution machinery. Like, the Mangler type incidents happened all the time for decades and continue to happen. And so, it is really not too outside the realm of possibility that, like, a particular machine with a penchant for taking toes or something would get a nickname like the Mangler.
Yeah.
I
don't know, what I kind of like about it is this idea of how, like, the origin of how the Mangler came to be evil. Because you do find out it is, like, possessed by a demon. And it's possessed literally, like, on accident. The guy just starts talking about, like, oh yeah, there's all these summoning rites you could do to summon demons, and they need certain ingredients. You need, like, wolf's bane, or belladonna, or the blood of a virgin. And they start talking about, like, in our increasingly industrialized society, where there's all these people and all these things happening, the chances that, by complete coincidence, all the ingredients for these would just happen to spill onto a piece of machinery and turn it evil, they're like, it's a big coincidence, but it could happen.
This is where I think King's approach to we are going to resolve the horror problem by consulting the library really shines, because this one is like a critique of that approach. Like,
because the whole
one of the two...
Oh, yeah, go ahead. You can explain it.
Well, one of the two individuals, who is one of the main characters, I'm laughing thinking about it, goes to a computer program and has made an Excel spreadsheet that has, like, all of the right permutations of which very particular demon is inhabiting this industrial steam press and how they can most effectively get it out. It is hilarious. And it's a really poignant critique of this, like, weird technocratic approach to horror. Like, they are trying to out a Blood and Gears style machine by, like, compiling spreadsheets on a computer to, like, actualize the right remedy. And of course that doesn't work. Like, the idea...
I love, too, the way that they are talking about it, because they're like, yeah, if it had belladonna, then we could use some white voodoo magic on it. But since it doesn't, we should be able to just use some, like, good old Christian verses, maybe some holy water, that ought to do the trick. Where they're just looking at it, like, very scientifically, as though there was just a formula for how, like, you cross-references these various pagan beliefs.
And it's like a lot of Lovecraft, where they'll like piece together pages of the Necronomicon, and they're like, okay, I think we got this, and it goes horribly wrong. If there exists an entire functional realm of hell, right?
Yeah.
And they are weak to very specific minutia involving with, like, holy water and, like, Christian imagery and, like, pagan chants. Do you seriously think they wouldn't try to obfuscate these things?
Yeah.
You think they wouldn't try and, like, make it a little difficult to figure out what demon was in what machine? And, like, it just, you get a sense, as they, spoilers everyone, as they fail to exorcise the demon, you get a sense that, like, this is a world that we are just assuming mastery over, right?
Yeah.
We just assume that by virtue of being humans, we have an innate mastery over demons. They operate on their own fundamental understanding of the world. They are very clearly above us in terms of a divine hierarchy, and in a very similar way that we consider ourselves above the machines that were responsible for, like, the giant economic boom at the turn of the Industrial Revolution. It's a similar type of hierarchy and a similar type of fear. And I think that's what makes the Mangler effective despite having the worst name.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I criticized earlier the use of, like, the Christianity, the demonology stuff, but I think it works here because the fact that they, like, fuck it up.
Well, they fuck it up so bad, dude.
Yeah.
They mess it up so bad.
Like, they have this aside where they're like, he's like, oh yeah, if it had belladonna in it, this thing could eat, like, 30 Bibles, and we would need, like, a whole bunch of shit to get rid of it. But there's no way it has that. And then they just cut away to the woman who was killed by it at the beginning, and her spirit, like, her ghost is sitting around like, fuck, man, they're gonna fuck this up. I had antacid tablets that had tiny amounts of belladonna in them, and they have no way
That's
of
what
knowing.
I like. That's just the capstone to this, is that there's belladonna in the machine, which makes it impervious to, like, all forms of exorcism, because the company that manufactured the aspirin tablets had to change the name of Belladonna to not run into, like, regional copyright laws in Britain. It's so fucking funny. It's just technocracy through and through, and culminates in this great evil, which is, that's pretty true.
I gotta say, I love the ending of this, because it would have been really easy, like, it would have been really easy for this thing, like, you have a stationary object, this evil Mangler, and if you wanted to do this sort of, like, magical realism thing, you could have, like, it turns on when there's no power, and it attacks even though it's unplugged and whatnot.
Which it does.
And they do, it does all that kind of stuff. But you're like, at the end of the day, it's still like a piece of machine. And then when they start exercising it, it like pulls itself out from the foundation and starts bursting its way out of the building and chasing the guy down the street with eyes of like fire and sparks and spitting steam like a dragon.
The end of the story, he's making a phone call, and he puts down the phone. He's like, What is that noise? And it's the Mangler sprinting towards him.
Just sprinting.
He's miles away.
Sprinting down the stream. Just like the street rumbling as this giant industrial machine comes to haunt him down. Like, why would you end the story there?
Building.
I want to see how the fuck, like, this gets resolved. Do they have to bring the military out to fight this demonic machine? Does it pose a serious threat to the world? Like, how does the news cover this afterwards? Like, an apparently demonically possessed laundry machine went on a rampage downtown last night.
I like, and a lot of the mystery's gone when it stops moving. Like, how is it going to kill this man? It could just step on him at that point. It's a 2-ton machine. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Also, one little side note: I love that part of the way he convinces the main character is a detective, and he's talking with another detective, or I think it might be an inspector. He's talking with someone, and what kind of convinces him that possession might be real, because he's very skeptical at first, is this story about a possessed refrigerator.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, I kind of want to see a prequel about this possessed refrigerator.
Real talk, if someone told me about a possessed refrigerator and then I found a possessed steam press, I would absolutely believe it's possessed. Like, no question. I would be like, oh yeah, that's Satan in there.
It's the same thing. Also, the fridge is definitely like an SCP, like 100%.
Fridge, 1,000,000% an SCP.
I love the way...
Most of these are SCPs. Fridge, very clearly.
But that one specifically, the way they describe it, it's like, oh, it's this fridge, it was left, it like fell on someone, so they're like, take it to the dump. And then they take it there, and then, like, the woman whose yard it was in, like, her son is missing. They go to the dump and open up the fridge, and he's, like, dead, starved inside of the fridge. And they're like, how the hell did he get in the fridge? And they get him out, and then the guy who owns the dump goes back, and he opens up the fridge, and there's a bunch of, like, squirrels and birds, like, dead inside of it.
Like dead birds.
This thing is just drawing things in with its inherent fridgely charisma.
Alright, we gotta keep moving. I'm gonna literally spend an hour talking about the fucking Mangler.
Well, I mean, the next one is the Boogeyman, which is one of the ones that you also wanted to talk about.
Oh, I think you too, right? This is a really good one.
I honestly, as far as like the scariest story, like visceral, unnerving, I say the Boogeyman is the most. This is the one that like gave me kind of like chills as I was reading it. It's very unsettling.
So real quick, I'll just run through the plot, because it'll be important, I suppose. But the Boogeyman is about the Boogeyman. It's not a joke. Stephen King likes to a lot of the time reinvent like classic monsters like Draculas and Frankensteins and shit. So he was like, I don't know, we'll take a crack at the Boogeyman. Who cares? And in this one, this, like, rough and tumble, sort of classic masculinity sort of dude walks into a therapist's office to sort of talk out his problem, which is the Boogeyman has killed his 3 children. And then at the end of the session...
I don't need to talk with no shrink or nothing, but I gotta get this off my chest, you know.
And then at the end of the session, he feels a little better, he books a next one, and it turns out the therapist is the Boogeyman. That's the conceit. But that really does a disservice to the story, which is really, really good.
The way it's told from his perspective is what makes it so engaging and so creepy, because he never, like, actually sees the boogeyman until the very end. It's always sort of like hinted at. And again, it's the fact that it goes after his kids, where like you have this kid and it's like crying. It's like, what, 2-3 years old? It's like very young, where kids do cry. But they're like, it keeps pointing to the closet. And the first time he's just like, whatever. Kids, they gotta cry. That's how they are. And he comes back in the morning, kid's like dead.
Yeah.
And it's like...
and this is what happens, right? Is they're like, my wife, the kid kept crying and being like, Dad, there's a boogeyman trying to kill me in the closet. And I said, poo on you, kid. I'll smack you across the bottom if you don't just shut up. My wife wanted to put the crib in our room, and I said, that's how kids get soft. They turn into New York queers. Like,
I believe he does drop the N-word at one point. He's like...
Does drop the N-word,
He's very unlikable character, but then at the same time, they, like, not redeem him at the end, but, like, so his first kid gets killed, and he's just sort of like, crib death, these things happen. And then his second kid gets killed, and you could feel, he's like, well, these things happen, but I didn't want to have another kid after that. You could tell, like, it kind of hurt him. Like, he actually cared about it. And then, like, his wife gets pregnant again, and he's complaining about how, like...
While on an IUD.
She said she was on the pill and whatnot. But he's like...
She had an IUD, right?
Yeah, or something. I forget. He's just... It's that same, like, toxic masculinity, like the old... Just making fun of his wife or whatever. But then it's like the kid comes, and he's like, and you know what? Wouldn't it be damned? Like, he kind of looks like me. And... I don't know, like, I felt myself warming up to the kid. And, like, he genuinely wants to be a good dad to this kid. He gets a better job. He, like, moves to another house. Because he's like, the other 2 kids died there. We're gonna get a better house. We're gonna start over. This is gonna be good. He starts treating his wife better. And then, like, he comes home one night and, like, all the closet doors are open. And, like... There's slime sort of leading from the bathroom to the closet. He doesn't know how that got there. And you can tell he's trying to be like a tough guy about it, but like, how do you be tough in the face of something like that?
Right.
And I won't spoil everything, but just the way he goes from like slowly seeing him try to turn good and then having to face this unspeakable evil. Like, it really kind of, like, gets you in a way.
I had a bit of a different take. So I think, like, the real boogeyman is masculinity, am I right? But, like, really it is. The guy comes in and he says, he doesn't say the boogeyman killed his kids. He's like, I killed my kids. And the shrink is like, go on. And he's like, okay, the boogeyman killed my kids. And he goes,
but I killed them because I was responsible. Going.
Yeah, and he does say that. And I think the boogeyman in this story is really this, like, this weird nascent fear about the inadequacy of just sort of traditional masculinity. Because I think the story is at its core about how traditional, like, notions of masculinity, like a tough guy, put him up, sort of
you gotta 1950s. Defend your family.
Yeah, they're both actively harmful to the people that they are trying to protect, in this case the kids and the wife, but they're also grossly inadequate at protecting those people, right?
Because at the end,
the reason his kids die, I mean, is because he refused to, you know, intervene because he didn't want them to turn into like sissies or you know, shit like that.
He didn't take it seriously at first. He thought it was better for them to be tough and face the things, and it ended up getting his kids killed. But then, like, again, the fact that that third kid, though, because then it's clearly, like, he tries to protect the kid. He, like, keeps it in his room, and he, like, tries to be safe about it, but then at the end, like, that he knows that thing is going to come into his room, and he puts the kid in the other room because he's so afraid he can't stand it. And yeah, that's the point. It's like, even if you are as tough as possible, it's like the masculinity, the toughness can't save you from, like, the natural death. Or the supernatural in this case.
And I think that in this case, it's also sort of a commentary about how, like, traditional notions of masculinity, a lot of the time, are really comfortable fallbacks for like cowardice, because like he literally is sacrificing his kid to get out of having to see the boogeyman. We know the boogeyman is in the closet. Like, he's later in the story like, yeah, I saw the boogeyman would like leave trails out of closets. Open the goddamn closet and shoot it or something. But he can't do it. He literally can't do it. He's talking about, I don't want my kid to grow up weak. I don't want them to grow up a coward. And is like slinking around his house afraid of the closets. It's a really, I think, a really interesting sort of observation about that sort of masculinity. And it sort of culminates in this king and sex once again, but this super psychosexual fucking conversation that he's having with like Freud, right? Like, he walks into the Sigmund Freud office and he's like, hey, I killed all my kids, and I think that the boogeyman is like cucking me. There's like this weird element where like there's an implication that either the boogeyman took out the IUD that was preventing the wife's pregnancy, or the boogeyman was the doctor who administered it and just didn't put it in. And then slinks around the house to display to the dude that, you know, this is my territory. Like, I own this building. It's this weird, like, alpha male. It's really like
the real alpha Chad is the boogeyman.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this. It's this really creepy, like, subversion of, oh, you think your entire livelihood is tied up in notions of like alpha masculinity? Well, guess what? I fucked up your wife's birth control, and I own your house.
It's like, oh, you think you're gonna have a big job, big house, big man? I will fucking walk into any closet I want, and you're not gonna do a goddamn thing about it.
And it's crazy because at the end of it, the guy, you know, he does things differently in the abstract, but he's still got the same sort of ideology. You know, he's saying this women's lib thing is gonna kill. You know, it's gonna be the end of our children, and it's like, dog, your kids died. Yeah. What about what you're doing?
And that's I think what makes the Boogeyman such a good one. If you didn't recommend this one at the beginning, I would have. Because, like, for me, I think the story is more interesting taken literally, unlike Graveyard Shift. I think the Marxist interpretation of Graveyard Shift is really exciting. But the Boogeyman, you can very easily read this sort of, like, feminist, toxic masculinity angle to it, where it's like, yeah, that, like, this is not just hurting women, it's hurting, like, men, too.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, this is another one of those stories. We're going to have to get to these in the second half of these, but King will literally just write, like, women to die. He'll just be like, and then the wife died. Like, he does that shit all the time. Yeah. And this is one of the very... I mean, the wife in this story is still used to hurt the husband, but it is very frustrating watching her endure this and no one to learn any lessons. That sucks.
A sad state of affairs. Moving on. Yeah, I guess he does kind of have, like, if you're familiar with the comic angle, the women in refrigerators.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fridging.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was, like, a common thing, or if that was just a, like, comic thing.
I didn't want to bring it up after we talked about the magic fridge, but yes.
Okay. Moving on. Gray Matter.
I got nothing. I'm sorry. Go for it.
Spooky visuals. Kind of a fun story. Nothing really special. It's
me
guy
too.
Drinks beer. It has some sort of fungus. It turns him into a big gooey fungus man who absorbs cats and lives in, like, an abandoned house.
The two things that freaked me out about this one. Firstly, these people are alive. The people like this dad do exist. Yeah. I lived with them for a couple of years. There are people who will sit in a chair for 9 hours a day and just blobulate. And second is, this is one of the advertised stories on the back of my copy of Night Shift. It's literally like a reclusive alcoholic who begins a gruesome transformation. It's like, really? You want to talk about this one? You don't want to talk about the apex of human civilization, trucks? You want to talk about this one? Maybe it's a commentary on, like, poverty or, like, the cyclical cycles of depression and stationary living, but, like, anything other than the man turns into a blob seems like a little bit of a stretch.
I honestly just thought it was like a cool visual of like the man turning into a blob, and then like when the guys are going to investigate it, and they're slowly realizing like, I can smell him from the bottom floor of this 10-floor apartment, and also the realization that like none of the neighbors are here. Like, he's been going out and like murdering the neighbors one by one, and he has this whole building. And it's like, it's kind of creepy, but it's kind of a nothing burger. It was neat.
Yeah.
It's one of those things.
And then
I should mention, like, I've read this whole book before, so this coming back is my second time. And this is one of the stories where I got to it and I was like, what was this about again?
Oh no.
I was completely blindsided because I did not remember it, because it's just kind of a spooky story. And kind of the same thing with Battleground.
Okay, this one is literally an SCP. I think this is actually an SCP. I'm gonna Google it right now.
It's just tiny toy soldiers.
SCP toy soldiers, yeah. This is like a Dr. Wondertainment thing.
Yeah, this is like tiny toy soldiers fight Agent 47 from the Hitman series.
SCP-30055 toy soldiers. This is and again, it is a Dr. Wondertainment product. Oh, this is a fan site, so I don't know if it's official, but this, you could literally drop this in.
Yeah. Just, and there's not much to it. The only thing I could think of is like, is this possibly, maybe, a commentary on the Vietnam War and the veterans?
I wrote that as well.
It's like,
I was like, Vietnam is a strange choice for a war, but it was kind of like going on when he wrote it.
Yeah. The whole point is you got this like high-class James Bond-esque assassin who like, I take people out while wearing a suit and I look good doing it. And then he gets attacked. Some evil toy maker that he assassinated sends him like a tiny Vietnam army pack, but they're real, and they start attacking him. And like maybe the whole idea is like, yeah, you could pretend you're as tough as you are, but you couldn't fight half the soldiers. Like, you couldn't fight miniature soldiers, much less a real soldier.
Well, the commentary in this one is like, at the very end, the funny little grab in this one is that the guy engineers this plan to get around everything, and then there's a rocket launcher that is not described on the contents of the box. He's like, where'd they get a rocket launcher? And so he maneuvers around his window and jumps in a second window, only to be blindsided by a helicopter carrying a thermonuclear bomb. Which is an expansion pack for the Vietnam War specifically.
Yeah.
And, there's probably a commentary about how, like, the Vietnam War was the last... people were like, oh, this is the last war because people were drafted, right? Like, if you were wealthy, you couldn't escape with certain conditions. But, everyone had to go to this. And as a result, the support for the war was, like, lower than anything ever in the history of time. And so maybe it was a discussion of the Vietnam War as an inevitability even to the wealthy. Maybe it was a discussion of like the horrors of thermonuclear war. Maybe it was a fun story about a bunch of army soldiers that come to life and then they detonate a bomb in James Bond's apartment.
Yeah, it was James Bond versus the supernatural. That's how I get like this is the feeling like I don't think Stephen King was scared of anything here. I don't think this says anything personally. I think he just wanted to have, like, a cool story about a guy fighting tiny soldiers.
Yeah.
And, of course, following that up with trucks. And
Trucks!
All I have in my notes here is a single word. That word is trucks.
I wrote, fuck you. That's what I wrote. Listen, okay, I know we recommended ones at the beginning, but it's getting a little later and I'm getting a little looser. Do check out Trucks. It's like 15 pages. It's the stupidest goddamn thing I've ever read. Here's what happened.
What if trucks were bad for us?
That's literally it.
Maybe
it's like
there
all
are
the
too
industrial
many
horror.
trucks.
It's like all the industrial horror of the Mangler, but like nothing that made the Mangler good at all is in this story. It's like a group of people are at a diner and all of a sudden they're circled by a group of trucks, like Big Mac trucks
without drivers.
That don't have drivers. Yeah, they've come alive. All the trucks in the world have come alive. And then they're like, oh, we'll just wait for them to run out of gas. Duh. Which is literally the first thing I thought of. I was like, oh, this is easy. and then they start honking on their horns. They're like, one person will be saved, the person who refills us, you must refuel. And I'm
they
like,
use Morse code.
yeah, just don't do that. It's like, just don't do that. What are you fucking talking about? And then they do it, and it's like, we've become the slaves for the trucks. They're like, well, maybe this will end soon because like they'll rust. And they're like, no, they're gonna force humans to make more trucks.
Somehow.
It's like, damn, what if we were the slaves for the machines instead of the other way around? Except the machine is a fucking truck.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not like computers or anything. It's a truck.
Yeah.
This was the precursor to Cell. King wrote this, and then he said, I'm going to do it again 20 years later.
This is the precursor to what?
Cell. It's just miserable book where, like, everyone gets a call on their cell phone at the same time, and the call makes them turn crazy.
Oh, okay.
That's the whole point.
There was, like, a Black Mirror episode about that.
It's literally the same as what if trucks came alive, but it's what if cell phones came alive.
What if cell phones were evil? Yeah, and this famously got made. This got made into a movie.
This was a movie
called Maximum Overdrive, with a
directed by Stephen King.
Soundtracked by AC/DC.
We gotta remake Trucks.
They pointed out, they're like, Stephen King, often his adaptations are terrible, and then he gets to direct his own, and he makes like a big dumb comedy action movie out of it.
Yeah.
Famously, if you've never seen it, the Big Mac truck has a Green Goblin mask on the front of it to make it look more sinister.
That's so fucking good. We gotta watch this movie.
Yeah, maybe. Halloween, perhaps. I don't know. Are you familiar with the Stephen King cameo? Because it literally opens on it.
Oh, I'm looking it up. Truck? Oh, no, it's called Maximum Overdrive?
Yeah, just Maximum Overdrive, Stephen King. I'll wait.
You are an asshole. It just keeps printing out asshole. This machine's calling me an asshole.
Honey, this machine's calling me an asshole.
This rock.
And then I think it shoots out a bunch of change and kills him or something. Because in the movie, it's not just the trucks; it's like all mechanical devices get turned against people. Because of an asteroid sent by aliens.
He is literally directing his own work, and he has made extensive edits. What an insane man. Fuck you. You are an asshole.
Trucks. Good times.
Let's get off trucks. Trucks A1. Let's go. Let's get some love for trucks in the comments section.
Sometimes they come back.
So this one, there's a lot of fridging in this one. Every single person does.
I would say this is like one of the weirdest stories in the collection. Like, it's not batshit weird like Lawnmower Man. It's just strange in general. Like, it's got stuff that you kind of associate with horror. Like, I guess that there's like ghosts or zombies. I don't know what they are. That's so like, it's kind of vague, which is what makes it so weird, because it doesn't rely on existing tropes.
So sometimes they come back. I don't know if this is confirmed or anything, but it reads like Proto Pet Cemetery, if you've read that one.
I have not, but I'm familiar with the movie.
I think it's actually pretty faithful. The idea is you bury something in the pet cemetery and it comes back, and then The Clash wrote a song about it. Oh my god, they made a movie off of this too. I think we have to watch this.
Pretty much every story in here has been made a movie, but most of them are like made for TV movies or like short films or something like that. Student films.
Well, this one actually would adapt to a movie pretty well. It's kind of like Pet Sematary. Basically the plot of it is this high school teacher is teaching some delinquents and realizes that one of the delinquents looks like one of the kids who killed his brother
when he was 10.
When he was
like
10.
20 years ago, but he looks exactly like this greaser punk from back then.
Yeah. I also like the idea that like someone 20 years ago would look the same as now and no one would bat an eye. Like would be dressed up in like hoop skirts and shit in the 70s, or like the greaser punk attire in the 90s, and everyone would be like, yeah, that's normal. But kids start disappearing from the class and are replaced by two other greaser punks who are some kind of like zombie ghost apparition.
They're like time traveling zombie ghosts.
Yeah.
which like sounds really weird, but it's when it's done at first, it almost seems like, you know, are they doing this thing where maybe he's going crazy? Maybe he's just imagining. Because, like, these people did literally kill his brother. It's a very traumatic scene. And it's like, oh, and now he's having to teach these delinquents who look like the guys who killed his brother. Like, exactly like them. But then, no, they just start taunting him. They're like, yeah, we killed your brother. We're coming after you, too.
It is a lot more interesting when it's like, you can't tell if it's induced by his trauma or there's something supernatural going on. And then, like you said, they literally come up to him and they're like, we are zombies. We're going to kill you.
But that's, like, they don't have any traditional zombie things. And they talk about, like, because he calls a policeman from back in the day. Because he finds out all their names because they're on the student roll call now. And they're like, he's like, oh yeah, I found out about them. They were in a car crash. We had to scrape them off the pavement. So it's not like they're, like, literally zombies.
What if they're like, we did a very good job scraping. They live to this day.
Yeah. And that's I'm like, are they ghosts? Except for they're, like, physical, and they go to school, and according to the other, like, students, like, a guy hangs out after school with them. It's like, what, are they living? Do they have houses? They transferred to this high school. Like...
this one works a lot better the less you
think about it.
Yeah, the less you are giving about the specifics of, like, their ghostliness, the better it works. And they tell you very little, which I think is a strength because, you know, pull at that thread and it'll unravel.
Yeah.
And it's also one of the very few stories in which, for the most part, everything kind of goes right. Sure, the guy's wife dies, but he goes to the library and finds a book on expelling demons, and then he does the things the book says, and then they're like, okay, cool, you did it.
He literally cuts off both his index fingers and offers them as tribute to the demon to kill the time traveling zombie ghost. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, sure thing, I could do that.
And then there's a sting at the end because Stephen King, at least at this time, had this affliction with writing stings, and it's like he summons the ghost of his dead brother to, like, kill these kids basically, or banish them to whence they came or whatever. And then the brother goes, I'll be back. And he's like, oh no, sometimes when you summon a demon, they come back. Roll credits. And it's like, all right, fine. I mean, I can't really be too beat up about it. What, your dead brother that you miss dearly is going to come back after saving your life? Damn, what are you going to take him out for pizza?
Yeah, it's just so weird because it's like, they set up the psychological trauma, then the time-traveling zombie ghost, and then out of nowhere almost, it's like one page he's like reading a book about demonology, and then the next day he's like in his classroom drawing pentagrams and like saying sacred rites.
And he just does it in one hit. Zero failure.
Does it work perfectly? Oh, I mean, sometimes they come back, so it's not perfect. He might have messed it up slightly, but it's not really elaborated on. Also, it's another one of those ones where, like, what happened after this? Did he, like, go back to school missing his fingers and just be like, yeah, I was in an accident where both of my index fingers got severed?
This one, actually, I think is pretty easy to explain the afterward. He just gets to be like, sorry, I had an accident. And now I don't have my index fingers, but I can still teach. And they're like, okay, well, you know that class where all of your kids keep dying? 3 more kids keep dying, and we didn't blow any whistles earlier, so who cares? And then he just continues to teach.
Yeah, just goes, yeah, he's fine.
Chills with his brother.
Okay, the next one, Strawberry Spring.
Oh, man. I have so little to write about this one.
Here's what I wrote on this one. Ooh, what if the narrator was the killer?
Yeah, that's literally, folks, that's the story. A strawberry spring, I think, is a spring where, like, it gets cold and then warm and then cold again. And it's, like, very misty. And so when that happens, this guy, sort of Jekyll and Hyde style, although it's all implied, like, it kills 3 or 4 women. Yeah. And it's just a story. It's like a true crime story about a bunch of women dying, except there's no crime element because the kid is not trying to investigate anything.
He's just
and then at the very end, there's another. Yeah, at the very end, there's another strawberry spring, and he goes, "But I think maybe I was the strawberry spring killer."
What was he called? They call him Spring Heel Jack.
Spring Jack Junkler.
Well, Spring Heel Jack is like an actual...
Spring Heel Jack!
Yeah. That's an actual, like, mythological kind of, like, modern-day urban legend. There was some killer in, I think, New England who was, like, they saw him murder someone, and then he seemed to jump, like, 8 feet in the air or something. That's why they called him Spring Heel Jack. I don't know why they called him that in this book, because there's literally no jumping. He just took the name.
Because of the spring. The strawberry spring.
Yeah.
Hardleg, I have something to tell you I'll reveal on this podcast. That killer was me. There's some good writing in here about, like, people we sometimes know. I don't know if in your, like, high school or middle school or whatever, someone died. But when that happens, everyone does exactly what this book says they do, which is that everyone knows them, but only by being like, yeah, I had a class with them.
Yeah. I dated them. There's a couple things, but I honestly don't think this story is worth talking about.
Yeah, it's okay.
And the ledge, almost...
I like the ledge.
You like the ledge?
I actually really like the ledge. Yeah.
I have written here, King tries and fails to make a stubborn pigeon seem scary.
I was scared of the pigeon. I've lived in New York. Those pigeons, they don't move. They will die on the train track. Okay, so The Ledge is a, like, thriller. There's really no horror to it. Basically, an old tennis club player falls in love with a mob boss's wife. Mob boss hates the wife. He goes, all right, here's the deal. If you can scale my penthouse, like the outside of my penthouse, you can get with my wife. I'll give you $20,000 and I'll leave you alone forever. If you don't, we're going to deliver a car full of heroin to the cops with your name on it, and you're going to prison for a long time.
When you say scale, I usually think of, like, climbing. And it's not like, he doesn't climb, he has to go out on the balcony and then, like, shimmy along this, like, 2 inches of brick that goes around the outside of this skyscraper and circumnavigate the building and come back.
And I think what this one does well, and what I think it's trying to emulate, is, like, the pit and the pendulum, if you've read that. The repeated stress, like the pigeon poking, is such a novel concept in, like, thrillers and horror and shit. Because if you do anything like 40 or 50 times to a human, it becomes, like, the most painful shit in existence. And this is a person, like, if you're a tennis player, you have repetitive stress injuries, right? Like, they named elbow injuries off of, you know, this type of thing specifically, and here he is enduring it on the side of a building for his life. So I thought that was pretty cool, but yeah, in general, I wouldn't put it in, like, probably even the top 10. There is some more psychosexual shit in this, though. There's some, like, weird cucking stuff, and also the wife gets killed for literally no reason because it would make the main character mad.
Yeah, just another. What was it? They didn't make this into a movie specifically, but they released, like, a big Hollywood movie called Cat's Eye. That has, it adapts, like, 3 Stephen King stories. This one, and Quitters, Inc., and then, like, an original one. And in...
Quitters is a really good choice for that one.
Yeah. Those 2 work together, although it's really weird because, like, this and Quitters are both... We'll get to Quitters in a second, but they're both, like, very realistic. They're very grounded, nothing supernatural. And then the 3rd story in Cat's Eye is about a troll that tries to steal a young girl's breath. And a cat that
sucks so
it.
bad.
Yeah. It's apparently
it's
one of his better rated movies, actually.
These aren't, like, horror. The first 2 are literally not horror, and then the 3rd one is a troll comes out of the wall.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the movie poster for this, and it's a cat's eye, and then in the bottom left-hand corner, a troll is coming out of the fucking wall. It's just the tonal shift.
Yeah, but
Speaking of tonal shift, I know what you're ready to discuss.
The Lawnmower Man.
Let's go.
Have you seen the movie
Man.
of The Lawnmower Man?
I literally looked up the synopsis of the movie and I was just like, this is a different movie.
Yeah. The movie is about a guy who mows lawns, and he gets taken by a government organization. And I think the Lawnmower Man, he's, like, mentally challenged, and it's supposed to, like, They put him in this 3D animated game that's supposed to make him smarter, but he like invades cyberspace and has control over technology, and he becomes the Lawnmower Man.
If you have like 5 minutes, please, I swear to God, just Google the Lawnmower Man and look at any of the 3D stills. They are the funniest thing you will see all night.
I gotta see this real quick. Yeah. Very, very early 3D graphics.
Yeah, it doesn't look great.
Yeah, and this famously, like, you know, this is even though you have this, and then you have the Stephen King short story that is about a weird pagan guy with a lawnmower familiar that, like, runs around naked through a guy's backyard and eats grass and the entrails of moles.
Yeah, so this is another one of those, like, profane religion stories. It's all about, like, pagan concepts of sacrifice. And the Lawnmower Man is, like, a satyr and, like, serves Pan and, like... that's just it.
Because it's, like, the weirdest thing about it is because he's just like, I'm just gonna mow your lawn. Now I'll go do the front. And then he does. And the guy calls the police to talk about how there's a naked guy in front of his lawn. And then the Lawnmower Man, like, burst in his front door, like, now you done fucked up, laddie.
Yeah, he goes, oh, you should not have called the police. Now I will lawn mow you. And he does.
But it's like,
he lawn mows him to death.
If he hadn't done that, would he just, like, have mowed his lawn and left? And, like, where's...
What's the next step of this?
I'm very confused. Like, is this one of those things where it's like, the only reason that anything bad happened at all was because you called the cops?
Here's what I'll say. Save yourself the trouble. The Lawnmower Man movie has 23 minutes of this virtual reality footage that you just went to Google and looked up, including a sex scene. So, please, God, go watch that. Don't read the story about the Lawnmower Man who eats the grass.
The weirdest thing about it, too, is that, like, this wasn't like it just happened to be named the Lawnmower Man. When this came out, it was released as Stephen King's Lawnmower Man. They bought the rights to the story, and Stephen King sued them to get it removed, because he's like, what the fuck is this 3D virtual world reality shit? You literally just changed the main character to be a lawnmower.
What can I say? He's the Lawnmower Man.
He's the Lawnmower Man. But yeah, Quitters Inc.
You've got stuff to say here. You go for it.
Steven, what pragmatist hurt you? Like,
oh man.
There's just so many times in this story where he's like, I'm not evil. I'm just a pragmatist. And I'm like, what? I'm very confused.
So, the story of Quitters is a man goes in to quit smoking to this word-of-mouth smoking clinic. And
I guess we should set up the very beginning where it's like he's at a bar, he meets an old high school friend, guy used to be fat, now he's like tall, thin, he quit smoking, he's like the junior vice president of his company. And he's like, man, what happened? He's like, I quit smoking, patched up my marriage, everything turned around after I quit smoking. Here's a card for this place, Quitters Inc. And the main character is a fat, dumpy man with his marriage on the rocks. So he's like, yeah, I'll do that. I'll try it out.
Exactly. And basically he has a son who is mentally disabled. He's kind of on the rocks with his wife. He goes into this... facility, and they go, yeah, we'll just turn your entire life around, dude. And so he goes in, and they're like, all right, here's what we're gonna do. If you smoke, we'll kill your wife and kid. And like, it's a little more nuanced than that. They're like, the first time we'll electrocute them, and then the 10th time we'll kill them, and then
we're gonna be having surveillance on you 24/7.
And then for the rest of your life, every so often, we'll take a look, but you don't know when it will be.
And if you're not, and if you're smoking, we'll find you, and we will hurt you and the ones you love.
And then of course, he does smoke. They electrocute his wife. She's fine. She's actually happy to be electrocuted because he's like, all right, now's the hard part, dude. Go in there and explain why she just got kidnapped and electrocuted. And he's like, I can't do that. And he's like, I think you can. And he tells her, and she's like, good. She's like, I'm so happy. They've given your life back.
Well, I mean, she's like, to be fair, I thought I was going to be, like, raped and murdered by, like, some sort of gang. So, comparatively, this is not that bad.
I don't know. King has his own problems with addiction, and so, like, clearly that bleeds through here. Clearly, you know, being free from the addiction is worth any price to him, and it makes sense to be writing in that way. But, like, if my husband was like... Yeah, so I couldn't quit cigarettes, so they electrocuted you. I would be like, fuck you, dude. Are you kidding me? What is wrong with you?
Maybe you just don't have enough love, Joseph.
A lot of early King is like this, and it's like the woman exists as an extension of, like, properties of the man. So, of course, she'd be like, yeah, totally, that's great. But, like, it's a little far from believable.
The one thing that really... makes this so weird to me is that they paint Quitters Inc. like almost exclusively negative. Like I said, the doctor the whole time is just like, don't overreact, sir. We're just being pragmatic. You mustn't get too hasty. Like, they're very coded as like this clearly evil organization. But they turn his life around and make everything better. So I'm like, what?
Yeah, it actually does work out.
Yeah, it works out very well. It's like he never smokes again after that first time, and he loses weight, and just like the other guy, he moves up in the corporate ladder, because that's all you need to do is have a good marriage and not smoke, and you could succeed in capitalism. It's fine. And
that's probably true.
And then it's like, so is this good or bad, or what are you trying to say here, buddy? I'm very...
What I like about Quitters Inc. is that it contains a stat that I literally stopped and looked up afterwards, which was there is a higher relapse rate for smokers than heroin addicts.
Is that true? Did you look it up?
Yeah, that shit sucks. That's crazy.
I mean, to be fair, I think the part of it with smokers is that it's like comparatively low stakes. So it's like, I could see someone being like, you know, they try to quit smoking and they don't really take it that seriously, so they're more likely to relapse.
Right. And, you know, in the 70s, the world was built around accommodating smokers. Yeah. So, like, there was really...
My middle school had a smoking room.
That's insane, dude. Are you kidding me?
I mean,
you're not that much older than me. You're like 5 years older than me.
They didn't use it anymore. It had been turned into, like, a lounge or whatever. But it still they had the old sign there to, like, remind people, like, how far things had come.
No, you know, our high school had that as well. It was a little interior outside area that went all the way up. And they were like, yeah, this is where you would smoke cigarettes. It's the smoking lounge.
Yeah. I know what you need, Joseph.
What do I need? Tell me.
A spooky voodoo stalker who murders someone and receives 0 punishment at the end.
This is the weirdest King story because nothing happens. Okay, so I have some stuff to say about this one because I do think it's generally pretty well written, but the story is just so low stakes. It's like this woman meets a guy, and then they spend a relationship together, and then her roommate goes, I looked up this guy with a private detective agency. It turns out he has voodoo powers. And then she confronts him, and she goes into his room, and she sees a book that is entitled How to Do Voodoo Powers.
And also the Necronomicon. He has that in his...
the Necronomicon is there, too, just casually.
Like, not even, like, the college version, like the abridged, like the actual made of flesh written in blood. She opens it to one page, sees something unspeakable, closes it.
She's like, damn, shouldn't have opened that.
Where the fuck did you
Who
get
could have
that?
told from the made of flesh? And then she goes, you have voodoo powers. And he goes, yes. And she goes, I'm leaving you. And he goes, darn it. And that's the end of the story.
Well, she takes the voodoo doll and she destroys it.
Yeah. Take that.
And it's like, can't he make another one?
I feel like they don't just... I think he needs a piece of her hair or something.
Yeah, but I mean, he got it in the first place.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a very dumb story. It's silly and there's no consequences, and it's resolved by a third party character being like, "I resolved the conflict."
What's really weird is that like all of his stories have like dumb, stupid twists tacked on to the end. This was the only one that needed one, and it didn't get one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but the story does have something to say about like the nature of love, because there's a really just this is just how people wrote in the 70s. The line is the guy knows everything that she wants. That's why it's called I Know What You Need.
Yeah.
And it's because he's doing voodoo on her and is like stalking her, right? And so the roommate goes, all he does is get you what you want. That isn't love. It's rape. Which is like, dog, what a shitty line.
He's trying, I guess. This is
yeah,
his only like story that has like a female main character and also like a female supporting cast. And I guess he tried to say something about it, but he didn't do a very good job.
And it's about a materialistic girl happy that the man provides. But I do think that there is a good discussion of like, well,
is mind control non-con?
Well, no, that's a different discussion. That is a discussion that
if we ever read hentai manga on here, we could talk about that then.
I was going to say that's a discussion that I'm going to be having with some fanfic authors. But the idea that like a relationship is at times extremely unpleasant and reciprocal, I mean, that is a distinction that is important. And I don't know, it is nice to see an admission that like in a world where culturally we expect love to be something super specific and super saccharine, it's nice to see an admission that like, no, love really does a lot of the time resemble her previous boyfriend. You know, it's like rough and the two of you want different things and there is an inexorable gulf between you you can never cross, and it's hard to implant your ideas into the other person's head and the two of you to come to a consensus. And it feels so easy to be with this other guy, but it is also very clearly not love. Yeah. And like that's an interesting, fun takeaway. It's just delivered in the most hackneyed, like, sexual assault metaphor of all time.
It's handled really poorly. And it wasn't scary, like, in the slightest.
No, there's no scare in this one.
Yeah. Unlike Children of the Corn, which had a scare or two.
Oh, is this our transition into Children of the Corn? Children of the Corn... Alright, Children of the Corn is a story written by and for the agricultural lobby in the United States. Listen... Children of the Corn is amazing work. It is the standout of this, in my opinion.
I could see why they made a movie out of it. And I could see why they made 7 sequels to that movie.
Yeah, I don't know what they did in the sequels exactly. Did the favored age just keep going down until they couldn't reproduce anymore?
Well, at the end of the first movie, instead of everyone dying, which I guess spoiler alerts, they actually set the corn on fire, kill the evil preacher, and save 2 kids that are like, they're the good kids, and they're fine. Well, also, the movie only takes place like after 3 years after they killed the parents, instead of like 13 or something. Like, it's not a whole generation, it's just like these kids. And then Children of the Corn 2 is like, those kids are now they were adopted largely by like another town, but then like another kid becomes a preacher. And then Children of the Corn 3, a couple of them get adopted in Chicago, and they convince like the kids in this tenement to overthrow the apartment complex and kill all the adults.
Really powerful and inspiring what collective action can accomplish.
Exactly!
But,
children rise up.
So, the plot of this one, if you're unfamiliar with Children of the Corn, first, please do read it. This one's really good. But, the way it works is, this couple that's going through a divorce, basically, hits a kid who is running out of a cornfield, and he goes under the car. They think they kill him, and then they check and see that, in fact, his throat has been cut, and he has been bleeding all through the corn, as in he has been running through the corn, bleeding out. So they really just ended his life by 30 seconds or whatever.
Yeah.
They throw him in the trunk. They go, we're going to go to the nearest police station. We're going to turn him in. Nearest police station is in a like a one-note town. They go in and no one's there. There's just straight up no one in the town.
Yeah, they find like an abandoned diner, and the calendar hasn't been moved in like 13 years. There's dust everywhere. No other cars.
And then they're trying to find the police station. Then they find out the church is open. Only the church is open. They walk in the church, and just like in Jerusalem's Lot, there's this sense of the profane, of the wicked Christ.
They have this giant mural painted by, like, it looks like it's painted by a child, which somehow makes it more disturbing, of like a giant Jesus with red eyes coming out of a cornfield.
Yeah. A dark Bible. This is actually the really cool part. Was the New Testament has been like severed and repasted to form like profane lyrics.
Yeah, he's like, most of the New Testament has been removed altogether, and the parts that remain have been sliced around, but the Old Testament is still there. You've still got the vengeful
Old Testament
God.
Completely fine. Yeah, so like they've made no additions to the Old Testament. There is still like a dark, vengeful God that like is punitive. And the coolest part of the story is when the guy goes, "This church is such an abomination to God that the only explanation for its continued existence is that it is willed by God." Like, the only way that this would be allowed to stand is if it is in fact permissible and correct. And it turns out that what has happened is there was a divine apparition like 13 years ago in this town, in which a god-like creature called He Who Walks Behind the Rose, or some sort of god, revitalized the town's corn crop, which was failing, and for this blessing of divinity set a favored age, and once you reach that age, you are killed by right of walking into the corn and being like devoured or something.
Yeah.
And so in this book, they've got like the birth date and death date of everyone who's ever lived in this town. And then you start seeing the names change from like Ricky and Steve to like Malachi and Abraham, and like just these like Old Testament style names. And then for a long time, there are no new additions. And then after a few years, there is a new birth. And the birth is of a child called Eve,
of course,
followed by Adam. And so they have, through a generation of breeding like literal children, they have started a divine paradise in this town in Nebraska that is cut off from all worldly communication.
Yeah. I mean, if you could call it a paradise, they seem to live in pretty much constant fear.
But that is, and what's frightening is that is in a lot of ways consistent with an Old Testament God. You know, a vengeful and punitive God who demands things and you do what he says. And what's frightening about this story isn't that there is a group of evil children who are going to kill the adults. It's that the kids are right. Like, the being that exists in the stocks is divine in some sense. He comes to them in their dreams and tells them, as punishment for the transgression of these two adults entering the sacred ground, I am lowering the favored age. And then all the 19-year-olds are like, I guess we have to die now. Yeah. And they just straight up do.
They just walk into like, the corn at night and disappear.
It is so absolutely, it is such an American form of a blasphemous horror story, because like I was saying earlier, the concept of all of these sects of Christianity existing in the United States and implicitly believing, even though they don't vocalize it, that there is a fundamental wrongness or uncanniness about alternative interpretations of the Christ. Here is the American Christ. Yeah. A agriculturalist, who conforms to Old Testament ideas of punishment and boon. And it's a very American idea.
It's a super fun concept, and it's one of the few stories that you read it, I'm like, I kind of wish this was longer. I want to know, like,
Yeah.
what happened before. I want to see more of this town. I want to see, like, more how they interact with more people. Like, I could have a series of short stories of, like, different strangers enter the town and, like, deal with it in different ways. Or, like, seeing the town, like, throughout the years. Or even, like, the movie opens up with showing how, like, all the kids in the town, like, they had the dream from the corn god. And it told them to, like, murder their parents. And they just, like, en masse, like, they all agree, they make these plans, and all the people, they're at work or they're at a diner or whatever, and the kids just start slitting throats and stuff. And it's very chilling, this sort of, like, cult-like behavior coming from these young, impressionable kids.
And it's just so good. You are in the story, you're walked through the process of understanding what the words in the book mean, like the birth and death dates only being 19 years apart, the gap in births followed by an eve.
Yeah.
You're walked through it because the main character has a thought process that, like, lays out the facts for you. But I really would have preferred to have seen, like, a series of short stories where you are just given these and you have to kind of piece them together yourself.
Yeah, see what happens. And then again, the ending, like, he just kind of, like, runs out into the corn, and then he who walks with the corn comes for him.
And he feels a relief. He's running, he walks into the corn, he feels a relief, he feels a blessing, and he is consumed by the corn god. It's crazy.
Yeah, and you never really get to see what it is or what it looks like. It's just sort of implied to be this big monstrous thing. I think the only downside about it, beside the brevity, is just, like, the characters were kind of annoying. I didn't really care about the man or the wife. Mm-hmm. And again, the wife was just sort of like, oh no, they're going after the wife. He's got to go try to save her.
Not the wife, no!
She's a lady. Okay, so ready to move on? We're almost to the end.
Yeah, we've got 4 left, and they're basically just melancholies instead of horror stories.
Yeah, somewhat. Well, I don't know. So, the last rung on the ladder, you said you didn't have, like, hardly anything to say about this one.
Yeah, I really don't. It's a cool, nice little story, but you have something to say, right?
It's one of those ones, like, I remember the first time I read it, and I had basically the same reaction as you. I was like, okay, neat. I think the fact that both it follows Children of the Corn, and just in general, the fact that it followed 20, like, supernatural stories, and then suddenly you have this very real, very personal tale. Like, it just felt so tonally different from everything else that I was mostly just disappointed that there wasn't something spooky going on. But reading this again, for this, I think it really just sort of, like, hammered home the themes of it, and it hit me, like, really hard, both with, like, the melancholy of it, but also with this fear. And it's a fear unlike any of the other stories. It's this very real fear of, like, not having control over the people in your life, or this fear of, like, intense regret. And I guess I should go and I'll give a short synopsis of the story. Guy gets a letter from his sister that he hasn't seen in, like, years, and it just has one sentence. They reveal what that sentence is later, but he, like, immediately knows something is bad. And so he's going to find out what happened to her, and on the way he retells this story about how he and his sister used to live in this very rural area. They had, like, a barn and everything. And the barn, like, it has a ladder leading up to, like, the attic. There's, like, a long beam. It's not like a full attic. There's just a beam at the top where you can, like, make repairs to the roof or whatever. And they would climb this ladder 70 feet up, walk across the beam, and then jump into a big pile of hay that was, like, 30 feet high or something. Where you could jump from 70 feet and not die, because you would just go into the hay. And they were always told not to play on it, but they played on it anyway. And so they go up, they do this, like, 10 times in a row, and then the sister's going up, and on the last rung, the ladder, like, breaks, it, like, snaps in half, and she's just holding on by this one rung. And so the brother freaks out, and he just immediately is like, hold on, don't move, and then he starts running to the hay pile and just trying to stack as much hay underneath her as he can. He stacks it up, it's not a big pile, but it's as much as he can get, and she's, like, I can't hold on any longer. So he's like, okay, just drop. She drops. She breaks her ankle, but she survived. Which 70 feet onto concrete and you only get a broken ankle, you're pretty damn fine. They easily kill you, especially if you're like, what was she, 8? 10?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
I think she was 8, he was 10.
Yeah. And afterwards, she remarks, like, how terrified she was because she was holding on, she couldn't look down, and her arms were just straining, and she didn't know what was happening. She didn't know if he was going to be able to save her or what he was doing, but she just had faith that somehow he would find a way to save her. And so then he goes on to say, like, after that, they grew up. He went off to become a doctor. His sister, she entered a beauty pageant, and then she ended up marrying one of the judges after winning it, and she married, like, really young, and they had a big, messy divorce. And afterwards, she, like, wrote a letter, like, hey, can you come visit me? I'm feeling really down. And he was just too busy with law school. Or doctor school. I forget which one same thing. And so she remarries, she tries to make it work again, things don't work out, they're still exchanging letters, and she keeps getting more and more cynical, more and more fed up with life, and the men in her life, and the direction that her life was going. I think at the end they mention, like, he finds an article that says, call girl jumped from building. She swan dived off a skyscraper. And you find out that the sentence that she wrote on the letter was, I wish I had let go. Like, I wish I had never held on to that rung. And something about that just, it's this idea that in her life, she was holding on to that rung just like she literally was earlier. Like, her life sucked, and there were all these bad things happening. And all she wanted, all she was hoping for was that someone in her life, her brother, would come and help her out, would do something to soften the blow. And he was too busy. He never came for her. And at the end, her arms gave up, metaphorically. And all she did, that I wish I had let go earlier. It's this idea that all she was doing was suffering, and it was for nothing, because nothing was being built up underneath her. There was no one there to catch her this time. And it really hits home. Like, I have a brother who's had some, like, he's had problems with drugs. I have, like, cousins that are having failing marriages, and another cousin, like, his dad committed suicide a few years ago. And I try to keep in contact with these people as much as I can, but I got that same thing where it's like, I'm busy with work. I can't always visit them. Even if I did, I don't have these big, strong relationships with them. But it's this fear that maybe these people I love, these people I know, are sliding into despair, and I haven't done enough to help them, or I haven't done anything. And it just sort of, like, chills me with this dark pit in my heart that, like, maybe I could be helping someone, and I'm not. And I don't know, maybe it's just a personal thing. It might also be kind of like a privileged take to be in this position where it's like, yeah, nothing's really wrong with my life. My fear is that the other people around me are sinking and I'm not helping them.
To me, it seemed kind of like the Not Now Dad 4-panel meme. But no, it is nice to see Stephen King write non-horror. And, you know, there is a lot of good writing in here.
But yeah, moving on... Unless you had something to say about it.
No, that was very good.
I just had that. That was my one ramble. The other ones are... I kind of feel like it would have been good to end with the last rung on the ladder, because it's called The Last Rung, you know, and it's different from the other ones. But then you follow that from The Man Who Loved Flowers, which I'll repeat. Ooh! What if the narrator was the killer?
So dumb. Just a dumb fucking... It's late and I'm tired. Flowers is not particularly good.
If you skip one story, skip Flowers.
The idea is that, like, the man is chasing the platonic ideal of love and not anyone in particular, and buying flowers for them, and 80% of the story is him haggling with a flower salesman, and that's it. That's the entire story. It's like 4.5 pages. We have just so little to talk about here.
One for the Road.
One for the Road is another prequel to Salem's Lot.
This one has, like, vampires.
Yeah, so this one is like imperfect Salem's Lot. It is about vampires.
It does place like, in Jerusalem's Lot.
They're like, Jerusalem's Lot? No one goes there. Not since the vampires happened. But two things about this one make it, in my opinion, much worse than the other story titled Jerusalem's Lot in the same collection. The first is that it is almost a shot-for-shot recreation of Dracula. Like, it's really cool that Jerusalem's Lot pivots into Lovecraftian stuff after like sucking you in thinking it's going to be correspondence back and forth. This one, they straight up just do the "come to me, my love" stuff. It is,
I feel bad admitting this on the Halloween episode, but I've never actually read Dracula.
Oh, it's you can watch. There's like stage adaptations that are pretty.
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of movies. I assumed
watchable.
it was just like classic, like there's a vampire, they go to hunt it, yada yada, stake through the heart.
Van Helsing is probably in it.
Yeah.
No, it's Bram Stoker's Dracula. Bram Stoker didn't direct it. He's the author.
Yeah.
And then so there's that. And then the other thing that I dislike is that they just straight up tell you it's vampires. Like, what makes the Lovecraft version so powerful, and what makes a lot of these things powerful, is no one in a lot of them comes out and says something like, "Dang, I think it's Frankenstein."
Yeah.
But, like, you are led to believe that it is a classic horror monster by the context in which it exists, right? The characters in this one look directly at the screen and they say, "It's vampires," and they do it on like page 2 of the story. Like they're not cagey about it at all.
Yeah.
They're like, should we tell him that it's vampires?
And I don't know, honestly, if they didn't describe them as vampires, it's so weird to me how far the idea of vampires has shifted in popular culture. Because nowadays we're kind of like, as weird of a movie as it was, Blade kind of cemented the vampire as almost this like science fiction entity. Like, vampirism is a disease. They have their like physical bodies and everything. They can't necessarily hypnotize you. So it's weird to see the vampires in here where they're like floating on air and have ghostly auras and can like
and hypnotize you.
And I wrote this was the worst as far as like the Christian stuff, because they literally defeat the vampire by throwing a Bible at it.
Yeah, this one is like, and he truly destroyed the vampire by touching it with a Bible. They like make the sign of the cross. No respect to Van Helsing at all. That was a very delicate maneuver they had to pull.
Yeah, it's literally like it's like the one guy's being lured in by the vampire in this snowstorm. It's this really cool imagery of like this young, she's like 8-year-old girl, but she's a vampire, and she's just in this like thin dress in the middle of this blizzard. And she's standing on top of the snow. It's not sinking underneath her. It's like very ghostly, very surreal. And then he's like leaning in where she's like, "I just want to give you a kiss." And then her fangs come out. And then the guy literally just throws a Bible at her and it hits her and she hisses and runs away. It's like,
damn,
we defeated the enemy by hitting her with a book. Like, oh, we got her. Gotta watch out for that. Like she was a raccoon on some trash cans. You just had to throw something at it. It's like, oh,
shoot!
Get out of here, damn vampires! Guy just walking around with a sack full of Bibles to throw at him. But yeah,
the Second Amendment guarantees your right to a Bible.
This also, by the way, would have been a good one to end it on. One for the road. Like, I get it. Because it's one last story. But no, then they follow it up. Well, I guess, did you have anything else about the vampire one, since you like Jerusalem's Lot?
Nothing about the vampire one, I apologize.
Yeah, there's not, I said it's some creepy imagery, and then that's about it. And then the woman in the room, which is, like, the last rung on the ladder, except it rings hollow for me, because I haven't really dealt with, like, an old, aging parent.
Damn, I had the exact opposite reaction. Last rung on the ladder rung hollow for me, because I'm just so good at being...
there for everyone who needs you.
Yeah, I've never let anyone down. And also, I mean, I'm coming off a funeral for someone who died under very similar circumstances to this, so which it does tug at the heartstrings. But what I like about Woman in the Room, it's there's no horror. It's just a kind of melancholy story about a son functionally assisting his mother with suicide after she is too far gone.
Yeah.
And it is a very striking discussion of it's very honest about death and the end of life. You know, there really is no dignity in controlled environment deaths. The story is about a son kind of trying to come to grips with the term that, like, though the mother won't come out and say it, she is attempting to, you know, get the son to assist her suicide functionally.
Yeah.
And there is very, very, very good writing in here. Just, like, very good stuff. Written very well.
Oh, yeah.
There's, like, time skip stuff that's very interesting. They'll end sentences, and then there will be a page break, and will be a couple of weeks later continuing a sentence.
Yeah, from a different character or from a different perspective. Like it's written really well, like The Last Rung on the Ladder. And it's got that same, like, it's just a normal story of someone dealing with, like, an existential horror in their life more than, like, a visceral, thrilling thing. It's just more like, no, this is a scary part of life that you have to deal with. The fact that, like, everyone's going to die and it's not going to be pretty.
And it's frustrating because there is this is the second time the protagonist has been through this experience, once with his grandmother and once with his mother, and he was like, my grandmother, when she died, it just felt so right. It was like, this is the natural outcome, and this just feels so wrong. There's nothing I can do that can make this feel like a graceful or meaningful death. And it ends with him just, like, basically she's like, hey, can you sneak me some pills, some pain pills from the house? And he's like, sure. And he just, like, gives her a couple, and then he gives her, like,
7
2 or 3
more.
times the amount that she needed. Yeah, and she keeps taking them, and she's like, all right, okay, that's that then. Yeah. And then she dies. It was very touching to me. And I really liked it, but the last 3 or 4 stories, with the exception of the vampire one out of nowhere, it's very weird. They're really melancholy.
It's weird that they ended on such a somber note. Where it's like The Last Rung on the Ladder and The Woman in the Room are just both these realistic somber tones. And then in between that, you have, like, a vampire story, which sucks, and a psycho killer story that sucks. It's like, why'd you sandwich these 2 realistic ones between 2 of the worst stories here? I don't know.
Uh-huh.
It's also weird, too, like, I wonder how much the organization, like, what order you put the stories in kind of, like, affects your mood with them. Like, right. I wonder if you started with, like, Last Rung on the Ladder and Women in the Room, and then did all the science fiction-y, spooky ones, if those would feel, like, more cheap by comparison.
That's an interesting question. Or if you, like, cut some of them out. I think we were very much benefited by, like, oh, okay, so after this extremely affecting one, we have 2 real stinkers.
And then a slightly more affecting one. I will also say there's one other thing I forgot to bring up when we were talking about, like, Lovecraft versus King, which has nothing to do with their style and everything to do with the fact that, you know, when we read a Lovecraft book, it was a compilation of his best work. And this is a bunch of short stories that were published at the start of his career.
Yeah, not only is this not a compilation of his best work, it is probably the closest to a compilation of his worst work that exists. And there's still some really good, moving, interesting stories in here.
Like I said, his highs hit higher than Lovecraft's, but his lows are just, like, just weird, just completely crazy.
Yeah. I guess what we're trying to say is, please rent Lawnmower Man at your earliest convenience.
Rent Lawnmower Man, read Lawnmower Man. Tell us which is better, the cheesy movie with the 90s CGI, or the strange short story about the satyr with the lawnmower familiar. Either way, though, we're approaching... Been recording for about 2.5 hours here.
Yeah, you're going to be watching this on YouTube. Hardleg's going to throw in the towel. This episode is going to be 50 minutes long. We're just going to cut out the hour we spent talking about the Lawnmower Man movie adaptation.
I mean, I'm probably going to cut some, but it's still probably going to be one of the
Yeah.
longer episodes. But hopefully people enjoy it. People generally seem to like longer episodes. Gives you a lot if you want to listen to something during your Halloween evening, I guess. I don't know. This will actually be after Halloween, so I don't know what I'm talking about. I should mention, though, we're on Spotify now. We're on iTunes. We have a RSS feed, so if you want to listen to us on whatever you listen to podcast on instead of YouTube, links down in the description. You can check that out. Not sure if this episode will be up simultaneously, but it should be up within a month or two. I'm slowly getting the whole backlog on there. And of course, I gotta say, if you like MBT, if you like hearing him talk, he has his own YouTube channel. Check that out. Link also in the description.
Yeah, and if you like Hardleg, I hear that Hardleg has a YouTube channel as well.
I do. You're on it right now, hopefully. Unless someone's already, bootlegging, freebooting my... I doubt it, but it could be possible. I also have...
I'm trying to rush to copyright claim this 3-hour video.
I do have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Channel as well, though. And of course, the Patreon. If you want to join in the discussion, I have the book club section on the Hardleg Discord for $1 on the Patreon. You can join the Discord, join in the discussion, give us some stuff to talk about. For now, though, I think we're going out. Did you have any final words, Mr. Joseph?
Yeah, I guess I would say I would paw through, if you can, Night Shift or find some of the more impressive stories online. I'm sure they've been PDF'd. But really do give Stephen King a chance.
Oh, yeah.
He writes stories that are very easy to read and very long, so it's very impressive when you're able to be like, I read a 900-page book that took me 3 hours. A lot of his... It is very frustrating to see that kind of horror as a genre is not taken seriously, and it can be good to kind of broaden your horizons if you've thought of it just as schlock. Pick up one of the more canonized works that he has written and give it a whirl. See if you like it.
Yeah. And, if you have any suggestions for authors in the future for us to look at next year's collection of short stories, let us know. Like, I would think maybe Clive Barker, maybe Harlan Ellison. Those are two names I know. But maybe there's some more modern authors that we're, not familiar with because we're not big into horror stories ourselves either.
We'll just pick out 100 SCPs and we'll just walk through them.
That's what someone was saying, because they're like, the modern horror is just... But those are so dry, they're so academic, and the ones that aren't are just weird.
Yeah.
My friend keeps sending me the ones where it's some guy in the 1800s exploring stuff, and it's got all this colonialism themes in it.
That's just Lovecraft.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks for coming. Hope you enjoy. Happy late Halloween. And until next time, stay spooky.